Hey everyone, welcome to Becca's True Crime Corner, and I am Becca. If you're as much of a crime junkie as I am, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I do unsolved, solved, and missing persons cases, and you don't want to miss the videos I have coming out soon. So hit that subscribe button, turn on your bell notifications, and let's roll into this video. Today's case is probably the most infamous case in America. It is something that grabbed onto me as a child. I remember this case being all over the media when I was just young. And I was only a few years older than her, so it was just so bone chilling to know what her fate was and what had happened to her. I can't believe today we sit here and it's still unsolved, but I feel like this is where my true crime journey started. So I really wanted to dive into this case even more than I already have and really find out all the information and all the facts. For one, I want to do this video so that you guys can share it and we can push it along, because the thing with these unsolved cases is somebody knows something. Somebody knows something, and it just takes one person speaking up to be the key in this case. Grab your coffee, grab your beer, grab your wine, your whiskey, whatever your drink of choice is, grab it, because this is going to be a long one. Sit down, get comfortable, and let's hop into it. John Ramsey was born on December 7th, 1943. He was born in Lincoln, Nevada. He later went on to go to college at Michigan State University, and from there, he decided to join the Navy as an officer. Once he got out of the Navy, he founded a company called Advanced Product Group. Moving on from that, he became a CEO of Access Graphics. In 1966, John married his college sweetheart, Lucinda. They went on to have 3 children together: Elizabeth, Melinda, and John. Unfortunately for them, 12 years later, they got a divorce. John went on to remarry Patsy in 1980. Patsy Ramsey was born on December 29th in 1956. Patsy was born in Gilbert, West Virginia, where she was also raised. After high school, Patsy went on and attended college at West Virginia University. In 1977, when Patsy was 20 years old, she actually won Miss West Virginia. She would later meet John in Atlanta, Georgia. When her and John got married in 1980, she was 23 years old. Her family had mentioned to her that if she wanted to be serious with him and if she wanted to marry him, it was going to be a package deal, being that he had 3 children and they weren't going to go anywhere, and she had to be just as a part of their life as he was. Patsy had stated in an interview once that one of the reasons why she fell so hard for John was watching him with his children and just seeing what a great father he was, and that just told her what type of a father he would be even to her children. On January 27th, 1987, Patsy and John would have their firstborn child, Burke Ramsey. Burke was born in Atlanta, Georgia, where they were residing at the time. 3 years later, on August 6th, 1990, came Jonbenet Ramsey. Patsy had decided that she wanted to name Jonbenet because it was a mixture of John and Bennett, which John is her father's name and Bennett is his middle name. And then they decided to give Jonbenet Patricia, which is her middle name, which is also Patsy's full name. Jonbenet was best known for being a beauty pageant queen. She competed in all kinds of beauty pageants. She was well known within the community and was a force to be reckoned with. She won a lot of pageants. She was a strong contestant, but that wasn't all that she did. She did tons of activities like violin lessons, dancing. She was described as just being a free spirit, fun, loving, and goofy, as well as a little entertainer. In 1991, the family decided that they would move to Boulder, Colorado for John's business. Unfortunately, on January 8th, 1992, John's daughter, Elizabeth, who was 22 years old, died tragically in a car accident. On December 25th, 1996, the Ramseys all wake up around 6 a.m. to celebrate Christmas, and of course do what every child wants to do Christmas morning: run downstairs and open all of their gifts. Later in the day, around 4:30 p.m., they went over to a friend's house to celebrate Christmas and have Christmas dinner. Later on that night, they left their friend's house, and when they left their friend's house, they stopped at 2 other friends' houses to drop off some Christmas gifts they had for them. Jonbenet and Burke both fell asleep in the car on the way home. When they arrive home, John decides to just take Jonbenet and carry her upstairs to bed. Then John decides to play games with Burke for a little bit before he puts him off to bed. Both parents said that before going to bed themselves, they went ahead and checked on Jonbenet, where she was sleeping peacefully in her bed. And around 10 p.m., John and Patsy go to bed as well. Around midnight, a neighbor had stated that they saw the Ramseys' kitchen light on, but it was dimmed down really low. And around 2 a.m., another neighbor thought she heard a scream. Inside the Ramseys' home, they heard nothing, and nothing disturbed them from their sleep. The next morning, December 26th, they had planned to wake up early and go catch their private plane to go to Michigan to spend the holidays with John's older children. John woke up at 5:30 in the morning, and Patsy woke up a couple minutes behind him. John gets up and gets in the shower, and Patsy gets up and starts putting on her makeup and also puts on the same clothes she had on the night before. Around 5:45 a.m., Patsy heads downstairs when she notices at the end of the stairs, sitting on one of the steps, is just a piece of paper laying out on the step. When Patsy picks up the paper, she reads it and quickly realizes before getting through the entire letter that it is a 3-page ransom letter stating that they have Jonbenet. In the letter, it was stated that they are to come up with $118,000 for the ransom of their daughter. Ironically enough, the $118,000 is the same amount as John's bonus at work that year. The note itself was addressed to John. It stated that they could not call the police and that somebody would be watching them. It also stated that if they did call the police and got anybody involved, that Jonbenet would be beheaded. The ransom note stated that the call would be coming in tomorrow between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. The ransom note was signed Victory SBTC. And it also seemed to have some lines in it from a recently released movie with a ransom in it as well. Patsy didn't even get through the entire letter when she screamed out, "Check on Burke, check on Burke." John went and checked on him. She ran upstairs. They both checked on the children and quickly realized that Jonbenet was not in her bed. But Burke was in his bed, sound asleep. John tells Patsy at 5:52 a.m. to call 911 while he's reading through the note. Once Patsy gets off the phone with 911, she then calls a few of her friends and tells them what's going on. Her friends and the police show up around the same time at 6 a.m. The police stated that when they showed up on the scene that they went in and searched for exit points. Because at this time, they're thinking a ransom, they got out with her, and where could they have exited with Jonbenet? They go down to the basement and they come across a door that has a wooden latch on it, and they did not open this door or check inside the room. Officers later stated that they did not open this door and check this room because of the latch on it. They were stating they were looking more for an exit point, and the latch was on the door, so they didn't think exit point. Once they cleared the house and checked the house for exit points, they then went to the ransom note to look it over. At 6 a.m., one of the friends arrived and actually looked through the basement and opened that door, but the room was completely dark and they didn't notice anything, so they just closed the door back up. He did notice in the basement that there was a window that seemed to be broken and open, and then a suitcase that was awkwardly propped up by the window, as well as some broken glass. Unfortunately, police at this point still did not tape anything off or try to preserve any of the scene. The only area they seemed to have taped off and tried to preserve was Jonbenet's bedroom. Many people were moving in this house all over the place, in every room except for Jonbenet's, completely freely, contaminating what could possibly be a crime scene. There were many friends at the house. Their local pastor showed up, and also a victim advocates group as well showed up with coffee and breakfast. When everybody got done eating breakfast, the victim advocate group and some friends actually helped clean up the kitchen, including wiping down areas which obviously could potentially be losing evidence. All while this is happening, the police are looking around the house, looking for possible evidence, looking for fingerprints to maybe take, and grooming the outside of the house to really see what they can find as far as entry and exit ways. Police quickly realize that there are a bunch of windows that are unlocked at this house. There are also windows that are cracked open for the cords for the Christmas lights outside to come into the house. They find a window in the basement that is broken, and come to find out, John actually broke it the summer before because he was locked out of the house and he needed a way to gain entry. So he broke the window and climbed in through the basement. He unfortunately did not get this window fixed because honestly at the time it was on his to-do list, but he felt like he lived in such a safe area that it just wasn't pressing at the time. When all of this started going on, they decided they were not going to wake Burke. They did not want him to be a part of the chaos. They figured they would let him sleep and let him stay in his room while all of this is going on. But around 7 a.m., they decide to wake him up and get him ready to send him over to a friend's house. At 7:30 a.m., John collects the ransom money and is briefed by the police how to handle the phone call. It was noted in an interview that John was confused when all this was going on because it said that they would be called tomorrow 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. For him, tomorrow was December 27th, but he didn't know if this note was referenced from the night before, so it meant December 26th. So he wasn't sure at the time if the call would be coming in that morning or the next morning. Around 10:30 a.m., no phone call has came in, and all of the police officers left the house to go meet the FBI agents at the police station. There was only one police officer left at the house. At 1 p.m., the officer decided that she was going to give John something to do. She said she wanted to keep his mind busy and to keep him moving and distracted. So she tasked him with going to look top to bottom of the entire house to figure out if anything was missing or out of place. At this time, Patsy was sitting in a chair and she was motionless and just completely zoned out. John took one of his friends that was at the house with him and they started in the basement. They went throughout the basement and eventually came back to that same room with the lock on it. At 1:04 p.m., John opens up the door to that locked room and he turns on the light and he sees Jonbenet laying on the floor. He immediately runs up to her and screams, "Oh my God, my baby." John recalls just screaming, trying to get everybody's attention to get her help. Jonbenet had black duct tape covering her mouth. Her hands were tied above her head and a cord that was around her neck attached to a wooden garrote. A light-colored blanket was also placed over her. John ripped the duct tape off her face and then tried to untie her hands. While all this was going on, the Ramseys' friend, who was in the basement with John, ran up the stairs screaming for somebody to call 911. John then scooped her up in his arms and ran up the stairs with her and placed her on the floor. And then for an unknown reason, the detective, the only one at the house, picked her up and placed her by the Christmas tree. One of Patsy's friends got up and helped her walk to Jonbenet as Patsy was completely paralyzed. John was kneeling by Jonbenet saying, "My angel, my angel." And then Patsy threw herself on Jonbenet. 30 minutes after this had happened, somebody overheard John on the phone calling to tell them to get his plane ready. He later states in an interview that he just wanted to go to Atlanta, Georgia to be with family, and he was no longer allowed to stay in his house anyways, now that it had become a crime scene. The day that Jonbenet was found in her house, brutally murdered, instantly suspicion was drawn to the parents. As in most cases, we know that that's just how it is. Somebody passes away, it's either their spouse, it's their parents, it's somebody they know very closely. And they were all in the house with her that morning. So quickly suspicion rised on them. A couple days after Jonbenet's body was found in their basement, the family submitted DNA tests as well as handwriting analysis. After the handwriting analysis was done, there were a lot of similarities to Patsy's handwriting. You could tell from the ransom note that whoever wrote it was trying to disguise their handwriting, but it has been said that you're only going to be able to disguise your handwriting so much. And the ransom note was 3 pages long. It was also said by an analyst that after a certain amount of time, you're only going to be able to disguise it so much and you're going to revert back to your normal writing habits. So the ransom note was 3 pages. So eventually they kind of just reverted back. And I have seen the samples myself and they do look eerily similar to Patsy's handwriting. The note itself was also written on the Ramseys' notepad. So they had a notepad that was out because this was back during landlines. And so people would call the house and they would have a notepad and a pen out to, you know, jot down notes and to take messages. Well, this was written on their notepad. So whoever wrote it was sitting in the house, presumably, and writing this 3-page ransom note. There was also a note that was started and then thrown away in one of their trash cans. On the duct tape that was found on Jonbenet, it was said that there were a few fibers that were on it that matched closely to Patsy's sweater that she was wearing that morning and the night before. Within the first week, there was a family friend who pulled John and Patsy aside, who had a close affiliation with the police officers working on the case, and they had said that they were heavily looking at the Ramseys for Jonbenet's murder. They were not looking at anyone else. They were just zeroing in on them and that they needed to get an attorney and basically watch their back. At this point, the Ramseys decided that it was in their best interest to just stop cooperating with the police. Not really stop cooperating with them, but more so just stop talking to them. Although they did still continue to talk to the media. They also set up a $100,000 reward for anybody who had information on Jonbenet's murder. Once they knew that the detectives were solely focusing on them, they knew that the case would not be solved. So they went ahead and hired their own private investigator to help them try and solve this case themselves. And quickly, the media starts making lies, accusations, and just blatantly telling false information and pointing the finger at the Ramseys and basically anybody in sight in that family, even 9-year-old Burke. Also, the police were releasing false information as well that made the Ramseys look very suspicious. For instance, they said that there was no footprints in the snow outside, so there couldn't have been an intruder because there was no sign of somebody leaving in the snow. But if you look at the crime scene photos, there wasn't snow by the windows where the intruder may have left. There was only snow in patches, like all over the yard, but it was like in patches. It wasn't just around the entire house, like, you know, a couple feet of snow. There was only patches of snow, and by the walkways and a lot of the windows, there wasn't any snow. But they reported to the media that there was no snow, there was no footprints in the snow, so it couldn't have been an intruder. They also made a big deal about John leaving to go check the mail that day, but that was a blatant lie as well because they had a mail slot on their door, which means the mailman actually comes up to your door, drops the mail in your front door in your mail slot, and it's on your floor inside your house. So he never left the house to go check the mail that day, like they said. They also said that there was no way that somebody could have gotten through that broken window in the basement, that it was too small, they couldn't have fit through it. But a man later on goes on to show and prove that it is absolutely possible for a grown man to fit through that window and get into the house with no problem. A couple weeks after the investigation started, there was a retired detective who was asked to come on the case. He was very successful at having solved cases, so they figured, why not have him on? He could help us solve this case. Right away, he noticed that they were focusing mostly just on the Ramseys. For him, the evidence was not telling him this. He felt like they should be exploring other avenues, and they weren't. So he went on and left the case. When the autopsy came back, it was revealed that Jonbenet had died from strangulation, but she also had blunt force trauma to her head. There was also evidence of a sexual assault, but she was wiped completely clean, so there was nothing left behind. They found what they thought was pineapple in her stomach, not fully digested. That same day, they had found a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen table, and when they went on to test the prints on it, it came back to be Burke's and Patsy's. Although John and Patsy have always adamantly said that they did not give the kids pineapple that night. I mean, Jonbenet was sleeping in the car. They carried her in and put her right to bed. And then John and Burke played a game for a little while, but they never went in the kitchen. They weren't eating anything. Nobody took out the pineapple. Nobody ate the pineapple that night. It was also discovered that the wooden garrote that was on Jonbenet's body was made out of a paintbrush that was in Patsy's hobby kit. Although there was a boot print that was found by Jonbenet's body that did not match anybody's in the house. There were drops of blood DNA left in Jonbenet's underwear that later came back and did not match any of the males in the family. There was also DNA on her long johns, but it came back later and said that it was a marker for 2 people. Jonbenet also had DNA under her fingernails. None of this DNA matched anybody in the family, and 2 of the DNA matched the same person. Jonbenet had 2 marks on the back of her neck, and they thought originally that it might have been from a taser, but then there was also a theory that it came from one of the tracks from Burke's train room, which was a room in the basement as well. And the track actually matched up perfectly to the wound on her neck, but so does a taser. Obviously, being able to use a taser on her would subdue her and render her basically unconscious. So it would give somebody the opportunity to try and get her out of the house or try and take her or get her to go without causing a scene. So they had found in the Ramseys' house a mag flashlight that every one of the Ramseys said was not theirs. They've never seen it. It wasn't in their house before. But it seems like this could definitely be the culprit for the skull fracture that Jonbenet had. Oddly enough, in this case, there has been a few false confessions. I don't know what it is with people coming forward and falsely confessing to things, but in this case, there's a few of them. Gary Olivia is a pedophile who lived very close to the Ramseys. And when he was arrested, he had what kind of looked like a kit on him that could be similar to the fashions that were used with Jonbenet. They also found out that he had child pornography, and some of the stuff that he had were things like Jonbenet's autopsy photos. He also had a shrine for her and confessed his undying love for her. One of his friends actually also came forward as well and said the night that she died, he called him and said, "I hurt a little girl." The same friend said that he had notified police of this several times, but nobody has ever followed up with him on it. This person solely stayed in contact with him just to get information from him. He said he did not consider him a friend. He thought he was crazy, but at the same time wanted to help solve the case. And so he stayed in contact with him in order to get information from him. While he was in prison, he also wrote this same friend a couple notes stating that Jonbenet's murder was simply an accident and wasn't meant to happen. This person has also given the police these notes. Unfortunately, they did test him for DNA and he was not a match. And just a heads up to all of you guys, this man will be released from prison October 2020, so this year. And he's a known pedophile, and why he would be released, I don't know. But if you are in that area, just know that keep your children on a tight leash. Another person who came forward and confessed to killing Jonbenet was John Mark Karr. So there has been many conflicting stories with this guy, and from what I read, from what I heard, what I watched, trying to gather information for this story, there were a lot of conflicting things, and some of them come directly from him. But he had stated at one point in time that he had drugged Jonbenet and that it was all just an accident, but there were no drugs in her system. He also had stated that there was an accomplice and that it was just purely an accident. He didn't actually do any of it, but it wasn't planned. His DNA was not a match either, but his reasoning to that was, well, I had an accomplice and I didn't actually do this stuff to her, but it wasn't meant to happen. We didn't want to kill her. I had read somewhere that he actually didn't give any information that wasn't already released to the public, but then I had watched something that said he knew things like the fact that she was wearing underwear that said Wednesday and little details like that, but the media obviously already knew it because we were talking about it on a show, but supposedly those were details that weren't released initially and he wouldn't have known that. But I can't find any factual on that, so I'm not sure if he actually did give any information that wasn't already out there. Y'all, he sat down and did an interview with the ID channel. The ID channel ran a special on this. I don't know if you saw it, but he sat down and did an interview with them, and he's a very interesting character to say the least. I will try and link that in the description box down below if I can find it on YouTube. Otherwise, you kind of have to have the ID app or the ID channel, but he is definitely something else. If you can even catch a glimpse or a clip of that interview, it's very interesting. So now that we've gone over possible suspects, we've gone over people who confessed but are not DNA matches, we also have a ton of theories. This case has so many theories. I feel like everybody's got a different opinion on what happened in this case, but we're gonna go over all the ones that I could find. The biggest theory I think is out there and that everybody is convinced of is that Jonbenet had a chronic issue with wetting the bed. And that night she wet the bed and Patsy lost it and snapped and ended up maybe hitting her daughter and killing her, but not realizing that that would be the fate of what would happen. I watched a lot of interviews with Patsy and John. I really wanted to get a feel for how they did their interviews and kind of just assess myself how I felt about them. And it had been years since I watched them. And so I wanted to go back as an adult reviewing this case and really just kind of pick apart everything they said for myself. In one of the interviews that Patsy did, she had mentioned having cancer, and she had mentioned how after having her cancer scare the first time, things were just so small after that. And I'm sure people who have either been through cancer or have lost a child can relate to this statement, but it kind of resonated with me, being that I know somebody who has lost a child, and they've kind of said the same thing, like, you go through situations like that and you realize just how important life is, and those little things are no longer a factor. And she just said in the interview, you know, to think that I would murder my daughter over something so small after having cancer and being scared in that way is just insane, and she would never do it. And it just really resonated with me. Another theory is that Burke Ramsey did it. He had hit her a year before with a golf club by accident. They were on vacation and he had simply done it by accident. But because of this, people want to speculate that maybe he had something to do with it. I'm going to tell you right now, I am not going to sit here and speculate that a 9-year-old killed his little sister. I'm not going to. I think it's completely foolish. I think it's crazy. I've never heard of a story like that before in my life. I mean, I think I only know of one story of a sibling killing another sibling, especially at such a young age. I think it's really foolish and people are reaching. That's what I think. The police officer who was at the Ramseys' house whenever Jonbenet's body was found by John said in an interview later that when she was kneeling down to Jonbenet when he had found her, she had glanced up at him, who was also kneeling down at her, and when she looked into his eyes, she just knew right away that it was him and that she was looking at a monster. So as you can tell, instantly the police focused on the Ramseys. Another person who has been brought up in this case is Michael Helgoth. He was a neighbor to the Ramseys who only lived a couple houses down. He was 26 years old at the time, and it is believed that he had an accomplice with him as well. Unfortunately, he had committed suicide a day after there was a press release stating that they would find whoever did this and that they were narrowing down their search. The Ramseys' PI feel like he had involvement in this, and they think that he might have been murdered just to keep him quiet by whoever his accomplice was. The scene when he committed suicide was very questionable. It has been stated that he may have shot himself through a pillow, which everybody thought was kind of weird because why would he shoot himself through a pillow? He was the only one who lived there. What was he trying to muffle the sound for? There were also boots that were found in his bedroom that looked very similar to the style of boots that they said were at the crime scene. They also found a taser in his room, which, like I said before, they thought that maybe a taser was used on Jonbenet. So some things that closely matched what were at the crime scene, but once again, he was not a DNA match. The Ramseys' housekeeper pointed the finger heavily at Patsy. She said that Patsy often got mad at Jonbenet for wetting the bed. She also got mad at Jonbenet for picking out her outfits, and she also stated that it seemed like Patsy had multiple personalities. It was also stated by Patsy that the same housekeeper had asked her for an advance or for a loan right before Christmas, and Patsy declined. Another person who was heavily under suspicion was the Santa Claus at the house the night before. It was a man who seemed to be a little bit closer to Jonbenet than the rest of the kids. Although all the parents knew him and trusted him, he was a friend of all the parents, but he did seem awkwardly more close with Jonbenet than anybody else. Oddly enough, his wife had actually written a book about a girl murdered in a basement, and their daughter and a friend went missing on the same exact day as Jonbenet's murder years before. I think it was all just a coincidence. I'm pretty sure everybody else is convinced it's just a coincidence because he had had surgery, and it was open heart surgery, and he was not able to lift anything or do anything strenuous like that. There's no way he could have gotten her from the second floor all the way down to the basement. There's just no way he was physically able to do it, and his DNA also was not a match. But this dude was definitely a little weird, and he had stated before that Jonbenet gave him a container of glitter, and when he died, he wanted to be cremated, and he wanted the glitter to be mixed in with her because they just had a close relationship and a tight bond. The retired detective on the case also had some theories himself as to what he thinks happened to Jonbenet that night. His theory is that when they left that night to go to the Christmas party, the intruder came into the house. There were many access points for this person to get into, many places that they could have used to get into the house. They think that, or he thinks that he sat and waited there. He wrote the note while he was waiting. He had the suitcase by the window because his plan was to take her with him and to put her in the suitcase, but the suitcase wouldn't have fit that out of that basement window. So his plan had to change and he had to do his assault there. So this case is such a high profile case, and regardless if you think the Ramseys are innocent or if you think they're guilty, there's been a ton of aftermath with this case. For instance, there was an insane amount of scrutiny from the media and the police. And even though there was so much of that coming from everybody around the world, they still kept going in front of the camera to make sure that nobody forgot about Jonbenet to try and find her killer. And in 2008, the Ramseys were finally cleared because none of the DNA matched them. Although it has been said that the DA cleared them, but the police officers still believe that they're guilty. And unfortunately, Patsy Ramsey died from ovarian cancer in 2006. And in 2008 is when they were cleared. So she unfortunately did not live long enough to see that day. The Ramseys went on to sue a lot of tabloids for the stories that they were running. I mean, these tabloids were just running crazy and writing whatever they wanted, whatever wild story they wanted to throw out there. There was a story that one time, shortly after the murder, Patsy was trying to get away from tabloids because they were following her in Burke, and she ran into a grocery store to try and hide. When Burke saw his face on the cover of a magazine with Jonbenet saying, "My brother did it," or something along those lines. And it was implying, obviously, that he had hurt Jonbenet. There were lots of people too who turned on the Ramseys to earn money from tabloids and magazines and did whatever they could just to earn a buck. When the 20-year anniversary of Jonbenet's murder came around, Dr. Phil had asked Burke to be on the show for an interview, which he agreed to. Burke was completely ridiculed for smiling the entire time he was on the show. I don't think there was a topic that they talked about where he wasn't smiling awkwardly the entire time. But later on, Dr. Phil went on to say that that smile was just a nervous, anxious smile. And because he has never been in front of the camera, he was always very much protected by his parents to hopefully have a normal life after all of this chaos. So to him, this was a whole new world. He's never been in the spotlight. And obviously, I'm sure it's a sensitive and very shaking topic. So for Dr. Phil, he described it as more of a nervous and anxious smile, which I could definitely see because, I mean, it was awkward looking. It didn't look like a smile out of laughter or happiness or anything. It was almost like that weird, awkward smile. And I know some people have said before that they laugh in like situations where they shouldn't be laughing. I'm not one of those people, but I do have friends who have said before that they laugh in really inopportune times and they just can't help it. It's like the awkwardness coming out of them. So I guess I would equate it to a situation like that. For the 20-year anniversary, CBS rolled out a docuseries where they blamed Burke for the murder of Jonbenet in the entire series. Basically, the series was just a smashing of Burke is the murderer, basically. So he sued them, which good for you, Burke, good for you. I would do the same thing. I think that sometimes these tabloids and magazines and even, you know, docuseries and stuff, like, take it to a whole nother level. There is absolutely no evidence that makes him the murderer. Not a single piece of evidence, nothing. Except for somebody just came up with this story to try and figure out this unsolved mystery and painted him as the person. and he was a 9-year-old boy and his life was already turned upside down and completely shattered. Like, it's insane that we're attacking him even more. But Burke did go on to sue CBS and they settled outside of court. So I wanted to give some final thoughts in this case because there were quite a few things that I came across when I was doing my research that just felt like really nitpicking and trying to make something fit where it didn't belong. And I wanted to give y'all my final thoughts on that. And I also want to state before I even do that, that I don't know who is guilty and who is innocent. And I don't have my mind made up. And I do think that there are fishy things about the Ramseys. I also think that there, is things that are fishy about other people and other instances. I don't know who did it. That's the thing, is it's unsolved. We don't know. I don't make any speculations or accusations that I don't have facts to because there's just no need to. My opinion belongs nowhere in this without some type of fact backing it up. With that being said, I want to remind you guys, for those of you who say, how did this happen in this house and you didn't hear anything and you didn't know what was going on? So this house was 3 levels, right? It was actually 4 if you counted the basement. You had the basement, you had the main level, you had the kids level, and then you had the parents level. So they weren't even on the same floor, right? And where she was in the basement, from what I have gathered from my research, was she was downstairs in the basement on the other side of the house. Mind you, this house was 7,000 square feet. Do you know how big that is? That is a massive house. I feel like you could be just 1 floor apart on opposite ends and you wouldn't even hear what's going on. Like, it is a huge house. So it's totally plausible that they could have been upstairs in their bedroom and, Jonbenet could have been downstairs in the main living area with this person, and who knows? Nobody could have heard anything. I mean, if she was screaming and stuff, then yeah, maybe, but I don't know that she was, to be honest. I also want to state that I don't think that if this were an accident, like people try to say all the time, like, oh, it was an accident, Patsy didn't mean to hurt her, or, whoever didn't mean, nobody meant to hurt her, but that's just what happened, and then they tried to cover it up. A lot of people say that this is a cover-up for an accident. I'm sorry. There are so many other ways to cover up an accident than to sexually assault your daughter, to a garrote. Why? I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. That to me tells me it's somebody very sick who is sadistic and was looking to fulfill an urge, not somebody trying to cover something up. I just don't think that any parent would go that far to stage something if it were an accident. I really also think that it had to be somebody close to the family. It had to be. She had pineapple in her stomach that wasn't fully digested yet, which means she ate it in between the time of coming home and being murdered. And they didn't give her the pineapple, then who did? And how could somebody get her out of bed and get her downstairs and get her to eat the pineapple? And maybe that was kind of a way to, maybe it was somebody she knew, right? It had to have been, because why would she get up and get out of bed with a stranger and not scream and not say anything, or even sit willingly in the kitchen and eat pineapple? Maybe it was someone she knew and she said, hey, I'm hungry, on the way to go play, can I eat some pineapple, or can I have a snack or something? And that's what they did. They got her pineapple. Obviously too, if it was an intruder, then they knew the family's schedule. They knew what they were doing, that they wouldn't be home, that they could enter into the home. They knew the layout of the house. So to me, that says somebody who knew them well. I also wonder if the ransom note was really just something to keep them busy, or maybe they really were going to write a ransom note. Maybe like the detective said, they were planning on taking her and that just didn't work out. And he said that they probably wrote the letter while they were waiting for them to come home. So if that's really what they were doing and they had already had that planned and then it didn't work, that would explain the ransom note and why she was still there. Or maybe the ransom note was written in a way to keep them busy. Because think about it, you know, they didn't search that hard for the body. They didn't find her right away. She was kind of hidden in an area of the house. It was dark. There was no windows in that room. You couldn't see, right? So it took them time to find her. Maybe that was the goal. It would give them enough time to, you know, get out of Dodge, get out of town, go wherever they needed to go to get out of the way while all this was unwinding. So maybe it was just a tactic to waste time. There were numerous comments about Patsy's clothes and how she was, or how she said that she put on the same clothes as the night before. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me on this because I don't remember exactly where she said she laid them, but I'm almost positive she said she took them off and laid them on a chair in her room and fully anticipated putting them back on for the next morning. And in my head, it sounds totally logical because, you know, she went to a party the night before. Maybe she didn't wear them all day. Maybe she only put them on for the party, so she only wore them for a couple hours. She's gonna hop on a plane and go to Michigan where nobody saw her the night before. So realistically, why would be putting on those same clothes be a problem? Nobody even saw her, you know? Nobody who would see her the next day saw her the night before, so nobody would really know. And I loved hearing the comment, why would a wealthy woman of her status wear the same clothes over again? First off, I'm not sure why wealth or status means that you can't rewear the same clothes. I don't know anybody who has money or who doesn't have money who doesn't wear the jeans a couple times before washing them. So why would her wealth or her status mean that she wouldn't rewear an outfit? It makes no sense to me, the logic there. And the other thing that I want to point out is she didn't come from this rich background. Neither did John. I dug into their lives and they both grew up in middle-class families, both of them. Just normal, average, middle-class families, not wealthy, not anything exceptional, literally just the normal middle-class family. And John happened to make something of himself. So their success was built. It wasn't given to them. They earned it. They worked hard for it. Patsy actually worked too. So it wasn't like she was just this stay-at-home rich mom who was born with a silver spoon in her mouth, so to speak. She actually was somebody who, you know, worked hard and earned everything she had, and so did John. So if you wanted to say she's this wealthy, you know, predominant person, why would she rewear the same outfit? Well, in all actuality, that's not her background, and that wasn't who she was before. So she was a normal middle-class person. Normal middle-class people wear the same clothes, so that would explain why she would do that. It obviously was very evident from the beginning that the police had complete tunnel vision on this case. And they immediately started looking at the Ramseys and thought that because Jonbenet's body was in the house, that there was just absolutely no way that an intruder theory was what happened. The unfortunate truth too is that they completely botched the investigation, because when the police showed up at the house, they should have made everybody leave. Their friends shouldn't have been there. People shouldn't have been contaminating the crime scene. They should have immediately been scouring the whole house for tips and clues. I mean, the note was left on the stairs. There was a bowl of pineapple sitting on the kitchen table that nobody knew where it came from. There was a flashlight that nobody knew where it came from sitting on the kitchen counter. Like, there were so many places in that house. They wrote the note sitting in their house. Why everything wasn't taped off and treated as a crime scene is beyond me. I mean, I know that the Boulder police station doesn't have a lot of homicides, and I'm sure that that's a big reason why this case was handled the way it was, but there was so much evidence and so much lost. Like, the unfortunate truth is this case might have been able to have been solved if they had taken those steps and those precautions from the beginning. One thing I did want to note too that I thought was ironic in this case, after searching other cases too, is a lot of people wanted to say that the DNA was not something that should be held accountable because some of it is touch DNA, and I know touch DNA is easily transferred. But what bothers me is I watch these other cases and sometimes they want to say, yes, take this touch DNA. It should be everything in this case. That is the murderer. We have them. That DNA is there. But then in other cases like this one, they're saying, no, the touch DNA can't be trusted because that could easily be transferred and we don't know where it came from. So don't trust it. Don't trust it. It's just ironic that in this one case, the police are saying, don't trust this DNA. But in other cases, they might be like, the DNA is everything. I don't know. The unfortunate truth is this case is still not solved. It breaks my heart for their entire family. It breaks my heart for Jonbenet. She deserves justice. She deserves to have the person who did this behind bars. But I think between the cops having tunnel vision on just the Ramseys and the DA doesn't agree with them and we can't find a match for the DNA. I mean, there's just so many things that are playing into this that are making it unsolvable. All right, guys, that is it for today's video. Thank you for watching and be sure to leave me any of your case recommendations in the comments down below and I will see you guys next week.